you have these competing factions like Kirill Dmitriev hates Lavrov. Lavrov is the foreign minister in Russia. They hate each other.
Do you detect a tension between Rubio and Witkoff as they get together? Because certainly I do. I just looked at the body language when Zelensky was ambushed in the Oval Office and Rubio was not giving anything away, and Witkoff was being the little lapdog, and the body language was fascinating of the people around there.
Yeah, absolutely. Rubio hates him. He hates him. He thinks he's incompetent. He thinks he's been led by the nose by the Russians. I mean, this is the guy that went to Moscow and didn't bring his own translator and used a Kremlin appointed translator to speak to Putin. I mean, that's just, it's ludicrous, right? This is a guy that has no professionalism, no experience, no relevant experience at least. And he's notionally in charge of the security of Europe and setting the future strategic, picture in Europe. And it's absurd. And Rubio understands this. Rubio is not an idiot. He's a smart guy. He's always been anti-Russian. He doesn't like the Russians. And yeah, he seems to be kicking the can into the long grass. You talked about the deadline on Thanksgiving, but that deadline has now apparently vanished. Both Trump and Rubio said that, it could be signed by Thanksgiving, but it could be signed in a couple of weeks or, further. So I think what you've seen is Rubio successfully kind of diffusing this situation by relatively deft maneuvering, both on the international stage and managing the kind of competing factions in the administration. Because again, it's complete chaos. There's multiple factions in the administration. They're all trying to achieve different things. You have the kind of traditional Republicans like Rubio, and then you have the kind of isolationists, and then you have the kind of tech bro, kind of weird Peter Thiel factions like headed by Vance. And none of them really want the same thing. And you're seeing this kind of, power struggle play out. And at the top of this, you've got Trump, who's disinterested in detail, doesn't really understand what's going on half the time, is obsessed with his list of perceived grievances. And, Steve, as far as I'm aware, Witkoff essentially told Trump that he was working on something, and Trump was like, "Oh yeah, that's great, Steve. You go and do your thing." So Trump had no knowledge of the detail of this plan. Like I said, he first knew of the existence of the 28-point plan when it was leaked to Axios. And again, Axios were part of this Russian information operation. It was an active measure, to use the term that you would typically use to describe this. It's an information operation. The Russians wanted to make this appear like it was settled US policy when it was anything but.
I'll come on to that in the Russians bit in a moment, but I don't know if you've seen the 24-point proposals that have come out from the Europeans. Do you think that is a more sensible counter proposal, and do you think that that would be acceptable to Putin?
No, it's not going to be acceptable to Putin. But then again, I don't actually think the 28-point plan would be acceptable to Putin. Here's the thing. Like every government, the Russian government has competing factions. You have people that are trying to work towards Putin, to borrow a phrase from Nazi Germany, working towards the Führer. And then you have these competing factions like Kirill Dmitriev hates Lavrov. Lavrov is the foreign minister in Russia. They hate each other. You have Kirill Dmitriev, who's almost like Witkoff's opposite number. He's running a parallel foreign policy, and obviously that's stepping on Lavrov's toes, and Lavrov does not like this. And you can see in the language that the Kremlin used to talk about this 28-point plan that they probably wouldn't be on board with all of it, because again, you have to look at what Russia has done in regards to their constitutional amendments, right? They've put Zaporizhzhia and Kherson into the Russian constitution as Russian oblasts, Russian regions. So if they accepted this, 28-point plan, it would mean that they have to essentially give up territory that they believe is Russian. Obviously, it's not Russian, but they believe it is. And you've seen criticisms from some of the ultra-nationalists in Russia of this plan, because they've said, hey, look, we're not going to give up Russian cities. These are Russian cities now. If we give them up, they're going to be, that's a betrayal. So I don't think that the Kremlin would actually agree to this. I think what they're trying to do, at least you obviously have Dmitriev freelancing, and then you have the Russians using this as a helpful tool to drive a wedge between Ukraine, America, and Europe, and also create internal discord inside Ukraine itself.
No, it's interesting that mirrors some comments that I got out of a Russian academic I was talking to in Moscow over the weekend, and he said the plan might not be completely acceptable and everything else. But do you think the fact that Dmitriev has put this forward is an indication that Putin is really worried about what's going on in the front line? He's looking for some out that there is, and actually it's an indication, more of an indication that Russia is losing and not winning.
I definitely wouldn't say Russia was losing. You have to look at the dynamics on the battlefield, and what is currently happening is Russia is advancing. They're advancing slowly, but they're still advancing. What I would say is that whilst Russia can, at the moment, they're comfortable. They can continue this kind of tempo of operations for maybe 2 years, or 1 year to 2 years. That being said, the Russian economy is not looking great. The sanctions that the Americans have imposed on Russia have been effective. Reuters actually just published a piece in the last couple of hours, which said that by their analysis, Russian oil and gas revenues will drop by 35% in November, which is astonishing. I mean, it's a huge drop. So Russia is under severe pressure. I think that the problem that Putin has is once you've ramped up a war economy, it's actually quite difficult to go back to peacetime because you have a lot of factories which are producing munitions, and suddenly you're not expending them. You have a lot of soldiers which are on the front lines, which then you have to bring back to civilian life. And what do you do with those soldiers? Do you give them jobs in the factories that are producing munitions that you can't use anymore? And nobody really wants to buy Russian weapons now. Weapons were a key export for Russia. But at this point, nobody really wants to buy them anymore. People are going to buy Western weapons or Chinese weapons or weapons from other countries. So it's difficult for him. I think he would be very vulnerable if the war ended soon. He'd have to try and explain to the Russian people why, they've expended this huge amount of blood and treasure to gain devastated territories in Ukraine. Because I've been to some of the areas that Russia has occupied, and I've seen what's happened to them. And they're completely destroyed, like villages, towns, cities, where every building is destroyed. Everything is leveled. All the industry is gone. All the farmland is gone. It's covered by mines. It's covered by unexploded shells. It will never be economically productive in Putin's lifetime. So he's essentially traded, Russia's economic prosperity, because Russia was relatively rich, by Russian terms before this. It was selling a lot of oil and gas. It was making a lot of money. Gazprom was making an absolute fortune selling gas to Europe, and that's all gone. So yeah, he has to try and justify this to the Russian people. Dictators are not as susceptible to public opinion as democracies are, but Russia spends a lot of time and effort, focused on internally facing propaganda, and they do that because they are still worried about the opinions of the Russian people, even though they can't vote. They're still worried about what Russian people think.
Well, you segmented perfectly into where I wanted to go next, because I've seen in the last 10 days to 2 weeks a massive uptake in propaganda, Russian propaganda, coming out talking about the fall of Kupiansk, of Pokrovsk, and painting a very, very bleak picture on the front line, which doesn't match the reports that seem to be coming out from the front line. Can you give us an understanding of what is going on the front line in reality?
Sure. Well, the Russian government claimed that they'd taken Kupiansk. That's just not true. That's just completely false. In regards to Pokrovsk, it's an evolving situation. It is very difficult for Ukrainians. They're still fighting in Pokrovsk. The Russians haven't taken it. And to be honest, again, coming back to what we were previously discussing, if they take Pokrovsk, great. They've got a destroyed city with almost nobody living in it. It doesn't actually bring them any closer to achieving their objectives. And this is part of the problem with a lot of the analysis and a lot of the coverage of this war, right? People have been talking about Pokrovsk a lot, so people seem to think that it's therefore got some level of strategic significance. It doesn't. Nobody in 2022 would have gotten a map of Ukraine and said, hey, Pokrovsk, this is a key strategic city. It's not. It doesn't have any inherent strategic value. It has symbolic value. It has operational value at some degree, but even that is kind of gone now. So taking Pokrovsk okay, it's they've advanced, but they haven't. It's not like say taking Kramatorsk. It's not like say taking Odessa. It's not like say even taking Kharkiv, for example. It's not a strategically important location. It's not a key industrial city. So yeah, they'll try and play it up, but it's in the broader sense of the war overall. It doesn't really matter, to be honest with you.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.